Welcome to Remote Daily.
To introduce our guest, here is a brief video from the National Endowment for the Arts portraying our guest of today. Enjoy before we go right into the conversation.
I got into coding because I wanted to do things that I couldn't do by myself, and being able to collaborate with machines meant that I could do things that I do poorly faster, and then I could do things that machines do poorly better. The first place I started performing was with my mom, who was a storyteller from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I would play the Iroquois rattle and drum while she told stories. I then became a classically trained opera singer. I started composing and directing and making more and more emerging technology mixed with live performance and opera, and kind of ended up in museums. Nowadays, I use a lot of different media, AR and VR or interactive media, to tell stories, co-creating with other types of non-human systems. As an artist or as an activist, I look at the way that the Iroquois Confederacy was built. We said that anything that I'm doing now is the result of 7 generations behind me. Anything I do will have a lasting impact on the 7 generations ahead of me. We use stories as a way of taking values and ethics and putting them into the core of innovation. I started looking at the media landscape we have now. How do I take information and encode it for future generations? A lot of my work is really about creating an ethical framework for software development and design, and articulation of values and ethics within technologies with the understanding that we need to future-proof these. There's a notion that the technology we've created now has outrun us. No one knows how to regulate it. We accidentally opened this Pandora's box and we can't get it all back inside. But actually, we can choose to use technology to build a more just world, a more equitable world. We can demand that. We can say that we want algorithms that are human-centered, that are for our environment, that are pro-democracy. We can articulate the values we want to see in technology and communicate those to 7 generations in the future. What do we want to achieve with the culture and social network that we're creating?
So many big questions. And here's our guest today. Please welcome +1, Amelia Winger-Bearskin.
Hello. Cowboy joined me on my lap. He's a little too big to be laughed on, but he doesn't know that.
Sorry, what's his name?
Cowboy.
Oh my God.
He looks like a cow. He's a boy, you know. Come here. You can come back up if you want. Yeah.
Hi, Cowboy. Welcome to Remote Daily. And Amelia, it's such an honor to spend time with you because this video is really bringing a lot of the questions together, I think, that you deal with every day. And so let's begin. And let's begin. I have to say, when I watched the video first time, I couldn't look away from your forearms. They look so beautiful. Yeah. So can you share a little bit about that? I know it's a very personal question to ask about a tattoo, but can you share a little bit of what is going on there?
Yeah, I got these at Old Crow in Oakland, and this is corns, beans, and squash, which are also known as the 3 sisters. And I'm one of 3 sisters, and we're all Haudenosaunee, so we love like the story of the 3 sisters because we're 3. I think I'm squash. My oldest sister we think is corn, and the little one beans. But if you ask different ones, they'll say different things. So, and then this is our celestial trees and sky domes, which is this part of the Haudenosaunee creation story. You may have heard about the sky woman who falls onto the back of a turtle and creates the world. So that is our story of our creation myth. And that we talk about sky domes, and we live in a sky dome because we live on top of a turtle's back. So
wow, wait.
Yeah.
So the story of the origin is that the sky woman.
I mean, here's the thing about this story. So the first time that I heard this story was an elder storyteller. My mom is a storyteller, and it was when she was my age now. She was like around, in her 40s, and was becoming like a very well-known storyteller, but she's still not an elder storyteller. There's still the elders that really they're all the knowledge keepers. And so this was an elder storyteller who my mom was just dying to learn everything from. And she came to Strawberry Festival at Ganondagan. She started telling our Haudenosaunee creation myth at noon on Saturday. And finally, at about 6 and 7 p.m., my mom took us home and she was still telling the story. And then the next day we came and the story was still going on. And I never heard the end, right? So it's an incredibly long story. It's really beautiful. It has this incredible duration. It's kind of meant to be told like every day by the fire over the winter months. I don't know if you've ever been to New York, but I know you're all in New York, but the winter's a little long. It's a little long. So, it's like you can imagine the story kind of gets unfolded every night. But the core of it, and if you've ever read this beautiful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, they talk quite a bit about that, our myths. So if you want to kind of read a beautiful book about the plant and botanical marvels of Haudenosaunee ancestral territory in upstate New York and Canada, that book is really great. And it also talks about our myth, but it is about the sky woman who falls. She lives in the sky world and her husband is Skyman, and she's pregnant with twins, and she pulls up the sacred roots of the celestial tree, and she sees a beautiful water world below, and she falls into it. And then that's when all the animals decide to catch her on the back of a turtle and to create a world to hold her and to hold her children. And so there's sacred herbs that she carried with herself that helped to have a lot of our healing medicine. So we have so many, every single aspect that is important to us exists as a kernel in that story. So it's really beautiful and really long. So
Wow.
I'll love to tell the whole thing, but then you'll we just do this every night. Every night. I just
shared the book for everyone who wants to look into it. New York Times bestseller, Washington Post bestseller. Got lots of awards. Looks and like an amazing read. So thank you for recommending that. And to unveil a little bit more about your heritage, you have this amazing name, Amelia Winger-Bearskin. To me, it sounds like a little bit of a song almost. How did that come together? How did you land on this amazing name?
Well, no credit, zero on my part, because it was my parents that, picked that name for me. But my father is Michael Winger. And, he really wanted to have a hyphenated last name with my mom because they were like very, 70s feminists and really interested in kind of like having that combination. And in the matriarchal tradition of the Haudenosaunee, we would be taking her clan as our clan. And so it seemed right to take her name as our name as well. And her last name is Bearskin. And so we're related to Chief Bearskin, who was a leader in our tribe that helped to unite the Seneca and Cayuga in that sort of terrible journey during the Trail of Tears from our ancestral territory to Oklahoma. So kind of honoring both sides of that name. But it's such because Winger has that kind of like wing sound to it. When I did my first performance art festival in China with Ai Weiwei at his open performance festival at the 798 district, and they were translating everyone's names into Chinese characters so we could have badges that people could kind of talk to it. It was like really important to kind of have everyone have a way of communicating about each other and to each other, because it was so important to kind of have this community in this very first performance art festival in China. And everyone was kind of going through this process of this beautiful like kind of conversation around their names on how to translate it. It was a really kind of beautiful first day. But when I got up there, I was so excited to like tell them about myself so we could like translate this. And they're like, no, we've already done yours, Amelia. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird because like they're like, no, we've already done yours. And they show it to me, and then all the women are like, oh, that's so cute, you're so cute. And I'm like, I'm like, can't read the characters, I have no idea what it is. Finally someone comes up to me and they said, well, your name, it kind of like sounds like something else, and it sounded to us like for the love of a winged bearskin. And I was like, that is really adorable. So that I got to have this like these characters for the duration. And the best part of it was when everyone came up to me and would look at my name tag, they'd go, oh. And I'm like, can I just always have a name that people come up to me and go like oh, you're so cute, please?
Wow. Yes. And I have to say, I mean, in any language, it works. You have these, and you also shine a light, I think, through your own way of being that makes people just go, aw, when they meet you. So I met you, I think, maybe 10 years ago in New York City, and I started following your work, and I've been admiring what you do ever since. And I think in the video you just said 7 generations ahead of you. That is kind of what you, I mean, no pressure, but this is what you put on yourself when you make art. So how does that like influence what project you choose as an artist or activist, that you're always saying, well, here's my heritage. I'm bringing 7 generations. I'm standing on their shoulders. How does that influence where you go?
Well, yeah, I mean, it reminds us that we're in a constant conversation, that we're just in one node of a very large loop, right? Which is all of the antecedent wisdom that I'm carrying, not just on the shoulders, but that are like, completely embedded within my being, or as the ancestral wisdom of those that came before me. And that anything that I do now is going to have this lasting impact on the 7 generations in front of me. And so rather than centering myself and my point in time as being so important, you kind of look at yourself as a fluid part of a larger loop that I'm carrying forward and I'm bringing to this next generation. And I like to think about it, because I'm an artist, as a way of abstracting information, right? Like the information from 7 generations behind me, with each generation becomes more difficult to condense into its most important format, right? Even something as simple as like this incredible live show that we're on, right? If we were to explain to someone in 7 generations from now, like, what was this? We could talk about the pandemic and what Zoom was and what Zoom fatigue was and why we had to have live music and all these great conversations. We could explain all of that, but all of that might be difficult to explain to someone that doesn't know what the web is, because there's going to be something more amazing or something else that will happen by then. But maybe it's more important to just say it was very important that we reconnected after like a collective trauma and had a great time and thought ideas together and breathed together. And that's really something that we could translate abstractly by saying there was this moment, right? Maybe we could tell our own creation story about this
And
moment.
Yvonne
right?
and I just had a telepathic connection here, because Yvonne just wrote in the chat, it's even hard to explain now what we're doing.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
most of us digital knowledge workers, like when we explain to our parents or grandparents, they're always like, is this a job? Like, can't you do something that's like a real job? I'm like, well, I'm just not gonna talk to you anymore. So it's gonna be very hard, and it makes a great point. It also reminded me, one of our dearest and most popular people that have ever been on Remote Daily is Michelle Thaler, astrophysicist, works at NASA. And she talks about this in a similar way as an astrophysicist. And she said, we're all dead stars. And we're just here for this little moment in time. And life and the end of life, as an astrophysicist, is being looked at in a completely different sense. And it sounds a little bit to me that you're coming from even if it's not so scientific, it's a family, a traditional and indigenous background, but you have a sort of a similar sentiment of saying, I'm just, a very tiny part of something much bigger, and this is how I look at life. And that is amazing. You also were so kind to bring something that you would like to know to the room. We always ask/force our guests to bring a question to the audience. So what would you like to know from all of us today, Amelia?
I usually, whenever I start my classes, I usually say, what inspired you today? And that's just something that I like to center my students to start thinking about their daily life as inspiration for everything that they do. So that's usually the question that I ask is, what is inspiring you today or this week? And it kind of changes maybe from something that made you excited or happy or sad or interesting or creative, but just what inspired you. And I don't know very much about inspiration, but as an artist, I'm always trying to find out. I'm trying to discover.
And it's such a great question, I think, especially in this time we're in, where there's so many things that are not inspiring at all. They're just draining us out. They're exhausting. They're horrible. They're sad. And I love your question. What has inspired you today? So everybody who is in the room with us, get your fingers moving over the keyboard, and Hannes is giving you a little bit of sound to make your thoughts flow.
Amazing.
Wow. Amelia, do you see what beauty you just created here in the chat? I don't even know where to start. The beauty of flowering trees and my girlfriend, John. I've never read anything more romantic from you in the chat. That is amazing. Thank you. Sarah is reflecting on the abundance of love in our lives. Wow. George just says, change is inspiring me today. And Eileen puts the weather into the change and says, the 3 days of heavy rain ending and waking up to sunshine. Wow. Rashad is also chiming in on that. The sunshine, the warmth that is coming out in this part of the world, the connection. And Yvonne is also talking about connection, about inspiring conversations with women in midlife for a summit you're hosting. Awesome, Yvonne. Thank you for sharing that with us. And yes, this is the connection we're all looking for. And Amelia, I'm so glad that you asked this question. This was an amazing moment. What sticks out to you when you read the answers here in the chat?
Well, really frequently people talk about nature when I ask that question, and I am not surprised. I think that's probably the most inspiring thing that is in my life, So I'm always like, oh, of course, obviously. But it is interesting because I don't say, tell me about the beauty that is around you in nature. I say, what is inspiring to you, and it is a theme that I see throughout my travels when I ask this question, and I think it's because no matter what incredible things we as humans invent and create, we're just so awe-inspired by nature.
And this is while I'm having a nice siren driving Zoom call here. This is a great segue into what you do as your day job, as you call it. You run Climate Justice Lab at the University of Florida, and I'm just gonna briefly take us on to this beautiful website that you have created with your colleagues that shows a little bit more about the Justice Lab. So how do you obviously you use like a lot of technology in this lab, gaming, VR simulations, but how do you use that actually for climate justice? Like, how does that work?
Well, if you go to the next, like scroll down, that's my little statement is
I love that answer. Just
scroll down. That computationally intensive technologies such as blockchain and AI methodologies, they have an environmental impact. Like, they use an enormous amount of fossil fuels, not maybe enormous amount in the entire scheme of things, but they are fossil fuel dependent. And we're trying to take a proactive role in advocating for less dependency on fossil fuels in those areas, but also understanding that indigenous sovereignty is not just racial justice, it is climate justice. 80% of our planet's biodiversity is on land stewarded by indigenous people. Climate justice includes the use of emerging technologies to heal and protect our planet, and our lab prototypes sustainable technologies and simulates new economies for a resilient, decentralized planet. So what I'm really interested in doing is, obviously fighting against that notion that these advanced technologies necessarily need to have to be fossil fuel dependent, because as indigenous people, we have had complex Turing complete database systems that use tying of knots or trading of shells 500 to 1,000 years before Alan Turing was ever born. So the idea that in order to do computationally difficult things, we have to only be dependent on fossil fuels is false. And then secondly, to understand that we will need advanced technologies to heal our planet, right? Like we can't just necessarily stop everything and allow garbage to sort of build out up and leach into our systems. We will need advanced technologies to heal our planet, but that's what we should be using them for. That's what their purpose is, right? Not to just continuously extract and cause harm. The purpose of this inventions that we're building should be to heal our planet. And then lastly, we can use technology to start modeling some of those trade-offs, right? We can use the wonderful USGS data that we have to build simulatory environments to help new generations understand the types of trade-offs that are necessary. I think we have a lot of problematic climate conversations that are unfortunately for certain groups of people are advantageous for the conversations to be highly confusing or catastrophizing constantly to overwhelm most of us. So we feel like we can't do anything, or we don't know what we're supposed to do, or we're kind of pushing each other rather than trying to push our legislators and our world to act together. And so I would like to create more simulatory environments within gaming worlds like Minecraft and Roblox and Universe Sims, so that we can have this younger generation of people who are very fluent within building decentralized economies and decentralized stories and decentralized communities. They already do this. Anyone who's the age of 8 to 20 right now has done this very successfully. If you're saying, well, we can't get 100 people to do something together in an organized fashion, ask your 8-year-old how they get their Minecraft server to organize and give money. They don't have money, and they raise
talk to
funds.
my daughter before the show.
Yeah. They have deep decentralized economies, right? And indigenous people have been talking about sovereignty economies for a long time and how important it is to healing our planet. Like understanding how our financial structures hold value and trade value, and then decentralizing that into sovereignty economies is something we've been pushing for a long time. And the people right now in the world who are practicing this the most closely are children on Minecraft. That's what they're doing. They're trading, they're putting value, they're putting time into value, and they're able to negotiate these spaces together. And so if we say we don't know how to do it, that's fine. We can get out of the way because they know how to do it, and we could empower them with information around our climate, and they would be empowered to make some decisions, hopefully better than we have.
But you said something about language that really struck with me. You say that we are basically talking about this whole situation in the wrong way. And I think the last IPCC report just came out a few days ago, and I think the notion was we have like 8 more years, which is another like, oh my God, what does that mean? What's happening in 8 years? Is it over? Are we all gonna die? Or it's like I heard someone say, no, it's not about that. It's just the ones who die fast have a better way off. And you listen to this, and you're just, the only thing that it creates is fear and a sort of like on my end, an ability to even talk further about it. I'm just scared. So what are you trying to do to change that? What is the language part of what you're doing? And maybe you even have some examples for words that we could use instead of always, just being scared.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really inspired by the Slow Factory. I don't know if you haven't had the Slow Factory on your show, have them on your show because they're amazing. And I think that what they're doing with rhetoric around climate change and climate justice is incredible for me, because they talk about disaster capitalism and the fact that there are actually people who are profiting off of this type of catastrophe language, right? So people who are using like, the moment has passed, we're all, like whatever, keeping it at sort of like 11, so to speak, like Spinal Tap universe, right? Keeping us completely panicked and terrified overwhelms us and prevents us from doing any just like small making sense actions, right? Like, well, look, you can't do small making sense actions. It's either everything, it's a catastrophe, or if it's over, and if it's already over, then you might as well not do anything. And then there's a lot of people who are making quite a bit of money off of that disaster capitalism, like having us all believe that it is a disaster, which it is, but keeping it in that language and that language only, like that there cannot be possibly things that we can do, like legislate or regulate, like that could never happen. So catastrophe. And so there's this kind of whole system of people that are really benefiting from that language. And so the other thing that I think is very toxic is the way in which we're supposed to hold each other accountable, and so that we're constantly fighting directly by pointing fingers at someone, like how can you say this when you participate in the culture that you're critiquing? How can you say that they should be regulating fossil fuels when you drive a car? Or how can, like, all these kind of things where we're just talking to each other, and that's like, we actually can't solve this crisis as an individual. Like, I can't be the very best me and then expect that will have a large impact. I actually have to be the very best me by working in coalition with my community to put pressure on policymakers to regulate these industries. And we know these industries are so powerful, they're more powerful than most of our governments. And so it really does take a large scale coalition. So we look at ourselves and the time that you have in a day and the ways in which you can help a movement, and you find your place in that movement, and you find your community of support, and you move, and you have strategic and small goals, and you meet them, right? But then it's very easy to get kicked off of that like path. If like I can only carry so much of a boulder, right? Like I can carry a small boulder and I'm like trying to help the movement. It's very easy for me to get knocked off of that when someone just says, yeah, but like I read this report and in 8 years nothing's going to matter, we're all going to die. Then it's very hard for me to carry anything. I get so overwhelmed. And there's kind of a lot of unfortunately strategic reasoning behind that, right, for making us feel overwhelmed and terrified. And so I think the most important thing is getting a small group of your friends who have like-minded goals, supporting each other and learning how to tune out the noise.
Of course, it leads us back to what you just talked about. I mean, I have a 7-year-old, and Minecraft is kind of like her, I don't know what to call it, but she spends a lot of time there. And Yvonne is asking in the chat, how does this Web3, how does Metaverse, and of course non-fungible tokens and the new currencies that are coming up, how does that fit into our opportunity to create more equity. And Yvonne, and I can only retweet that, Yvonne says, I hear people talk about it, I see the headlines, but I don't really understand it. Same here, Yvonne. So what what can you tell us, Amelia? Do you think that now that we are moving from this like social media kind of Web 2 into more like a actual environment that you also co-create, with virtual means, whether we have goggles on or whether we use it in our browser or on our phones and we just see it with our two eyes around us, do you think that has an actual chance to make us more equal even in our generation?
Well, decentralization was and still is the hope of many people in my generation. We were the early hackers on the internet when we were 12-year-old girls in rooms trying to figure out. And we were the first people to grow up with the internet and the last people to ever know what life was before it, right? Like that hyphen generation. And the promises that we believed in our little chat room interface only direct to modem, kind of before the World Wide Web even existed. Like what? Yeah, exactly. Like when we were communicating through those beeps and bloops, we were like, wait, all those things that people said about how complicated it is to vote and why I need all these different types of layers of representatives above like me voting directly on something is a lie now that we have these technologies. Like by the time we grow up, it's going to be one person, one vote on everything because we have the technology that will allow for direct democracy. And then we'll be able to have decentralized economies. We'll be able to have decentralized governments. And we started to create decentralized communities. We started to create decentralized currencies. Obviously, the most famous like project in that space is Bitcoin and then blockchain, what we know about now. But the movement towards decentralized economy has been strong. And it's been ever since, the 1980s crypto anarchist manifesto, right? When people started having a name for this, like what does it mean when we truly believe that we could have one person, one vote, and that the means of production, the means of sharing, the means of trade could belong to anyone, right? That's the hope and that's the dream. Now, oftentimes when you create a new technology, a lot of people get very excited about it and they just recreate the same inequalities that they're familiar with, that they benefit from, and they try to recreate it in this new space. And so a lot of times what you see in the Web3 space or in blockchain space is just that. It's exactly the model of capitalism that we're used to, and now it just has another name and it's maybe a different coin and it's not traded in any different way than stocks are, right? However, underneath it is this really true belief from a lot of people who are excited about it, like myself, that we are questioning what value is. We're questioning what ownership is. And we're saying, what if I owned a small piece in a larger thing? And how can I together and collectively be a part of something that's open and transparent, that has a regulatory system that anyone can be a part of and anyone can understand and know? There's reasons why it's very complicated to understand how our regulation of our current economy is in the United States anyways. It's very complicated for most people to understand. It's very complicated to understand cryptocurrencies as well, but at least they're completely open and transparent. And the belief is that could be better if more people are allowed to understand it and weigh in on it and have a stake in it, right? So I like to think about like, what if we question the notions of land ownership and we understood that blockchain plus like concepts of land back and indigenous custodianship could create spaces for climate justice. We could allow, right now, if I owned the mineral rights on my one property in Texas that owned the oil rights on that land, and they were building an oil pipeline through my land, I can choose to opt in and get revenue from that, but I cannot choose to stop that pipeline, even though I own the land and I own the mineral rights on it, right? So what if we question that notion of land ownership and every one of the people in the entire state of Texas decided to opt into a collective way of owning something that could be written on the blockchain? That's the kind of imaginations that a lot of us are having. Wow. And if I'm to be honest, I want to be a part of the Web3 and decentralized economies and blockchain movement if it's centering that. And the moment that we can't center that, then it's a useless technology for me and I'm not interested in it. But it's the beginning, and I'm trying to drive the conversation to the things that I'm interested in. I hope other people are as well. And I found a lot of community there that share a lot of my same values and are doing a lot of exciting things within DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. But of course, if this shakes out and it's a very new technology, it's a very new space, but if it shakes out and they're not centering the environment and they insist upon a dependence on fossil fuels, then I'm out. right? But I'm not going to be out just because there are questions that are raised. I am going to be in it to discover, can this be a better solution? Can this be a better economy? Can this be something that can destabilize our notions of value that have traditionally been based on extraction and destruction of our planet for the enrichment of the very few? And if it's not going to oppose that, then I'm out. But that is what I'm hoping will happen with this new way of having decentralized economies.
Do you see this happening already? Is there land in the United States where you can see this actually happening, that the people who actually own it will participate through blockchain technology or similar?
Yes. There are many experiments. Like, this is all so new that all of us are working in the space of, here's a lawyer, here's, land ownership, here's people who are donating their land, here's, crypto coders. There are lots of these experiments happening all over the country right now. And we are really in the experimental phase. My hope is that we will get to a point where anyone, regardless of how deeply embedded they are within the blockchain community, can say, oh, hi, yeah, I would like to sell my farm and I would like to do it to this collective way. And then that it just becomes an easy option. And because, if you leave behind people of different educational backgrounds, people of different means, then it's not a solution. But I hope is that it can be something that it's an easy option for people to decide to have ownership in a different way.
And I wanted to point out, you don't have this mic in front of you with no reason. You have a podcast where you, create a platform for people to share these new developments, and where you help coders, designers, software developers to also think about while they're building this new world, think about these values. And I just shared it in the chat here. It's called Wampum Codes, the name of which is?
Yes. I'm so excited to always talk about wampum. So wampum is a beautiful little clam friend that lives in the waters of North America, in the north part of North America. And they have a shell that is either purple or white. So it's a binary structure. And we carve those into beads. So it's a binary compiling system of two colored beads, purple and white. And we would use these wampum shells to encode contracts, complex contracts that were built from community consensus through storytelling around our economic values, our community values, laws, trade agreements, et cetera, right? And then we would weave these into these beautiful belts. And then the people who carried these belts would take them to all of the stakeholders that had been part of this agreement and interpret and storytell what here's the proof that this happened. What does it mean? And I can help you interpret it. And so it was really a pre-Columbian blockchain. And so I like to think of wampum as being part of this antecedent technology, this way that if we center technology just as being when Western culture discovered something, then we kind of miss out on all of these like really wonderful ways in which we had a pre-Columbian blockchain that was not dependent on fossil fuels, right? But it was dependent on community consensus building, which is something that's one of the really core tenets of blockchain. So that's why it's called wampum.codes.
Wow. The pre-Columbian blockchain. Learning so much from you always. And I can't tell you, everyone, like, we had a prep call, as we always do with our guests, and Amelia shared even more, and it's just so enlightening to talk to you. And I want to, I hope that we can just continue this conversation here, but I would like to point to one work of yours to close us out today, and just share this for everyone, because I find this such a poignant and I don't know, I'm still processing on this phrase. So I'll share it on the screen here, and I'll let you read it, Amelia, and please help us explain what you did here for the 2020 Awakening Project in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day, and why you created this billboard.
Thank you so much. So, For Freedoms and the Wide Awake Project, we're doing questions from artists. So I created two questions. One was, what is made bright by the loss of your light? And the other one was, who benefits from your burnout? And those two questions for me were really thinking, I mean, this is 2020, right? We all had a type of awakening in 2020. And so many of us were pushing so much more electricity and emotions through the tiny little filaments in our brains. And my question was, who benefits when they burn out? And in some ways, it's a rhetorical question of like the answer should be no one, right? No one benefits. But then the kind of deeper question is there are systems that benefit from us burning out. And if we as activists and artists are constantly using these sort of badges of honor of like how burned out we are, or how much we strive, or how much we're giving, and how close to the very edge of breaking we are not centering the values of care and activism that we want to see in this better world we're building. So we really have to start with our own activist communities. We have to say, we want to center and care for Indigenous women and children and build just and equitable, sustainable spaces. And we can't do that if it's riding on the backs and making vulnerable those very people we're trying to support. So I like to think about this a lot. I am definitely one of those people that is not a great example of that. I'm always, doing too much and kind of too distracted and get too excited about everything. But those questions I made because I saw so many of the people around me burning out who were carrying us in the community. They were the ones who carried us, and they were falling during the 2020 pandemic. And it makes sense because like that space was always vulnerable, and it just was made so clear at that time.
Amelia Winger-Bearskin, you are fantastic. Last question to you. How can we support you as a community? What can we do to support your work going forward?
Oh, thank you for that question. I actually have a community mutual aid group called no-funding.com, and we have weekly Zoom calls where we all just talk to each other. So if you'd like to come and be part of that community and just bring something you're working on, it's kind of like an artist support group, mutual aid network, no-funding.com. I love to say hi to each and every one of you. So
no-funding.com. I'm going to put that in the chat here, studioamelia.com/work/no-funding. What a fantastic initiative. Weekly meetings, just like ours, and you will see us there. Amelia, we always pass the mic back to the guest for a final message on Remote Daily here. You already shared so much, but maybe there's one thing that you haven't shared that you would like to leave us with on this Friday.
I would just like to say thank you so much. And in my language, we say Nyaweskano. Thank you.
Oh, can you say that again?
Nyaweskano. It is. Thank you.
Nyaweskano?
Nyawe. Nyawe is thank you.
Nyawe.
And then skano is like, for this day.
Nyaweskano.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say it's such an honor to spend this hour with you all and with guests like Amelia. I want to thank you all for taking time. Thank you, Amelia, for being an amazing guest, being a wing, being a bearskin for all of us. Thank you all for taking the time. Thank you for being on the streams out there. Have a good weekend. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.